Yeah, Wes won't be able to make it, but Evan thinks he's gonna be late.
Okay, we should be set.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'll call this July 30th meeting of the Arches Hotspot Region Coordinating Committee to an open at 3:07 p.m. We'll start with the approval of minutes from the June 17th regular meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I move to approve the minutes. Am I
Motion
on?
made by Councilmember Guzman Newton, seconded by Committee Member Councilmember Jalen Hawks. Any discussion? Seeing,
No.
yeah, go, Mike, do you have a discussion? Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Mike. You're muted, Mr. Duncan. I can't hear you. There we go.
Oh, there you go. Can you hear me now, Curtis?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my apologies. I'm in Durango installing a dishwasher for my daughter, and my computer I intended to be working from and checked out earlier today. Oh, it's a long story, but anyway, it's not working. I'm working from my phone, so it's kind of dicey down here, but I am trying to participate.
Okay, thank you, sir. With that being said, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I think that's a 5-0 vote. Next item is citizens to be heard. Do we have any citizens to be heard?
Nope, there were no submissions this week.
Okay, we will take that as a thumbs up from the public that we're doing a good job. Next item is number 4, committee member reports. I'll give just a brief report and update from my end and then turn it over. Carly and myself had a phone call with UDOT approximately 2 weeks ago just to kind of update them on our progress. In that phone call, we asked for an additional 2 months time to complete our work and deliver the results of the committee to them, of which that was granted. And so the official finish line is now November 1st as opposed to September 1st, which is the timeline we were originally working off of. So we do have an additional 2 months. We're hoping to still be wrapped up well in advance of that, but we have that time if we need it. I don't have anything else to add. Do we have any other reports from any committee members for the committee? Seeing none. We will move on to our next agenda item, item 5, which is off Main Street parking concepts. Matt Hancock with the Downtown Main Street Alliance and Chuck Williams with engineer for Moab City. So I will turn it over to those two gentlemen. We do have the documents posted in the packet. There are links on the agenda for the PDFs, downtown hotspot parking, and the side street schematics. So we'll turn it over to you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Good afternoon. How you doing?
Good.
Is Matt on there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll go ahead and go, since I was the first item on the documents, Matt, I'll go ahead and do mine first, okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah, so this was the documents, what we have, and I'll share the screen here. Oops. Wrong screen, that's the Google Earth. Oh, I have to close that screen, sorry. Oh, there we go, we had it. Yeah, now can you see that?
Yes,
Carly?
sir.
Okay, good. So this is where we were at as of last Monday, I guess it was. Carly asked us to put together where we were at as of Monday. We haven't completely gone through what we were calling was a level 3, which was where we were shooting for, which was to look at doing things like anything and everything we possibly could in terms of things like maybe moving curbs, maybe moving median strips, maybe reducing sidewalk widths, things like that. We didn't really get that far, so we took the opportunity to just try and look at each street on a case-by-case basis. And so what we found was that, so here is, trying to minimize, there. This is the top of the PDF. This is 100 South. And so since that has been recently reconstructed, we didn't do anything to it. I mean, it's a busy intersection in here. It's got the bike lane that really limits opportunities to do stuff in here and here. So we left that alone. Here's 100 South.
Chuck,
east of-
we're still
Yes.
just seeing the parking tabulation chart.
Oh, okay. I can fix that. Thank you, Nora.
Mhm.
I have too many windows open. My apologies for that. What do you see now, Nora? 100 South? Nora?
It's the 100 West Street
Yep,
corner.
100
Okay.
west to 100 north, yeah, or 100 south to 100 west.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So then, now you can see this is 100 South, where I'm moving my cursor at Main Street. So east of Main Street. The thing I'd point out is, as we've discussed before, here's 67 feet, basically curb to curb, which is kind of one of the limitations on the existing conditions, and these streets vary as we've talked about before. But we tried to maximize. We left this area free and clear for turning movements, ended up with median parking in the middle. There's not a lot of driveway conflicts here, which is a good thing. And then parallel parking on the north side of the street. And then there's a setback from the crosswalk here over at 100 East. And I'm just going to quickly go to,
Chuck, that 12-foot dimension for the drive for the lane, is that from the lip of gutter, or is there any shoulder between that lip and the lane?
it's lip gutter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes.
And is the setback from the crosswalk to the east for any particular reason?
Yeah, it has to be 20 feet per state code,
Oh,
Galen.
okay.
Yeah,
And so Chuck, sorry, Chuck, are you taking the parking off of the south side of that street then?
Yes.
Okay,
In order to make it fit, because of the 67 feet,
right.
there wasn't any room for anything else without going in and moving curb lines. And on this side of the street, this is the Greenwell Inn. That'd be very difficult to do. And I'm not sure there's much opportunity on this side, but we were going to look at that if we continue moving on this, if you'd like us to. The thing about 100 South is that we have currently designed an infrastructure project that is storm drains, sanitary sewer, culinary water, and green infrastructure. And so we looked at, I think I included that. I just want to explain it to you. That's what these sheets are down here that look a little different than those other sheets. These are our 100% design plans for the 100 South reconstruction. And if we went with that alignment, which had some bulb outs in it and some, at that time, back end angle parking, but it could, easily be front end angle parking now. We get a different number of parking spaces is kind of what I wanted to point out. And I'll go over those in a minute, but that's why there's two different scenarios here, assuming 100 South reconstruction layout on the parking tabulation and not assuming the 100 South parking tabulation. So back to where we were, here's 100 South, I'll go back here. Here's Center Street. This is West Center. We went with perpendicular parking along here. Here there's only 55 feet, 56 feet curb to curb here as existing angle parking. And this part is very similar to what Matt did. Went with the perpendicular parking over here, I believe, and parallel parking over here. We talked about it, looking at seeing if some of this park strip could be used for angle parking or perpendicular parking. When we looked at it in the field, the routes seem pretty shallow. I'm not sure. There's irrigation systems. We haven't really overlain all the utilities yet. So at this point, we just put in parallel parking there for that. On East Center, again, the setback on this side for the turn lanes. This has median parking down the middle, parallel parking on the north side, some parallel parking on the south side, but on Center Street, as a matter of practicality, this is the MIC. I just don't see how we can avoid the fact that we need openings here for, not saying we physically couldn't do it, but I think from a traffic flow standpoint, making every vehicle that goes in here, and this has travel trailers and that, and then having them come out and go right is something you just need to make decisions about, I guess. But go ahead.
I'm wondering if, as a compromise, if the left island, the western island east edge could be moved east a little bit, and so that the MIC basically has two driveways for that parking lot. I'm wondering if the eastern driveway, which could be more the exit one, and that could have a left turn, and then if people happen to pull out of the western driveway, they would be forced to turn right, but presuming the traffic allows it, they could just pull a U-ey in that spot and pick up another 4 spaces that way.
Could be. The total, yeah, it's possible, Kaylin. Again, these are such large driveways. Plus there's that driveway across the street that goes back and serves the back of these buildings. But I think that, we believe that this is a significant feature we shouldn't, because again, one of the issues is none of this has raised curbs, right? So these are potentially some type of pavers or something like that, so that if you, cars can cross it, if you know what I mean. There's nothing, so if you don't provide them a travel way, you set up conflicts where someone could potentially drive out here and turn left right there. I'm not saying they would, but it's something you got to consider. Now down to 100 North Street, and this is 71 feet curb to curb. This is where we pick up a lot of spaces compared to what's there today. Here's 100 West, so this is West and 100 North. Pretty much the template fit of just angle parking and the median parking, parallel parking here, parallel parking here. You know, you can't really squeeze in any parking here because of the turn bays, which I believe need to continue. Down here, 100 north on the east side, and there's only 62 feet curb to curb. And see, that's one of the limiters. You know, here's 71 feet. So this, when you cross Main Street, and you can see by this taper here, the curb to curb shrinks by 9 feet. So there's less opportunity under existing conditions to put in parking. And given the way that, and I know we've had discussions about deliveries and how those are best be handled, but we thought maybe make this a loading zone might be a good thing to do for Moonflower, because they seem to get so many deliveries at that location. And then put in a single row of median parking down the middle, and then parallel parking along the north and the south side. But because of this 62 feet, we just couldn't fit in the full width of the double, like up in here, the median parking. Now this is 100 East Street, and here I believe this is the firehouse, isn't it? Yeah, and so these driveways are a limiting factor over here. So we went with angle parking forward and went with 45 degree, which gives you a little bit more space than the 60 degree. And then down here, Center Street, 100 East, angle in parking down here. So really we went at it on a case by case basis, street by street, and I'll go past that, and came up with, so here's some of the, just a couple of, and Matt has done similar, I know. A Ford F-150 crew cab, kind of the typical four-door pickup truck, will fit in this space and in this parallel space. Typical minivan looks like this, gives you a little bit more room in the minivan over here. Toyota Prius, yeah, you got lots of room. And then the Astro design car, which is kind of this nebulous car, which is probably a full-size car of some sort, fits in here. Parallel stalls are between 20 and 22 feet long, 9 feet wide. The angle parking stall, 45 degree, 9 feet wide, 1810 on this leg, and it goes out into the street perpendicular about 19 feet 8 inches. So just those dimensions weren't evident on some of those air photos, I know, so we just wanted to point that out, some of our design assumptions. And so here's the tabulation that came up and with it. And if we focus, though, the way this would read would be, here's the street, here's the existing number of spaces. This is if we just did median based on our assumptions, or just did 90 degree, or just did 60 degree angle in. But we put together a composite, which is what I just showed you. And this is the change. And in all cases, there was a change in the plus. And so if you go on a street by street basis, the one that picks up the most is West 100 North, or pick up 36 spaces for a total potential increase. Let's just say it is for the final one, but at least under this scenario that I've just gone through, increase of about 129 parking spaces on those particular streets if we were to do that. And if we were to maintain the 100 South reconstruction layout that I showed you, the plans that we have now, it would be an increase of 111, because the layout of the 100 South doesn't pick up as many parking spaces as the exercise we went through above. So that's where we're at now. haven't gone through as far as we were intentioned to go by looking at moving curb lines, by looking at utilities. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Yes, Councilmember Jones.
Thanks, Chuck, for all your work on this, and staff. This is great. One question about the 100 North in front of the moon. Did you consider doing mid-street parallel parking? And I ask because it seems like that could potentially be used as a loading zone.
Yes, we did consider it, and we didn't really throw it out, but the whole thing of car doors opening out into the street we haven't really resolved that. Take the time to figure out those dimensions and where that would go, because it becomes almost a 90-degree extension of that 9-foot width, right? If you throw out the car door, parallel parking. Not saying it isn't doable, and that's an interesting point, but we did talk about it. So that's why we didn't go that route.
Okay, thanks.
This is,
So if it's,
I would echo that, Chuck. This is fantastic. Appreciate your work on this. Do we have another question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So in terms of, it seems like we've had some discussion about variation in parking stall width between cities. And so when you were sizing these, did you take the available space and then see how many you could fit? As long as you didn't, because it seems like if you're working with a constrained space, they might end up being a little bit wider than some places minimum, but there's no advantage to making them smaller because you might end up with a partial space on the end anyway. Did you go through a process like that, or how did you size this?
We absolutely did. That's why both on width, we maintained a minimum width of 9 feet, but in some places we end up with 12 feet, right? Because there's just that extra 3 feet, there's nothing there. And then we varied it between 20 and 22 feet in length, because sometimes there were limiting features, as you say, driveways or other obstacles that would say, well, we can't pick that up. We picked up a couple of spaces by maximizing the length, minimizing the length on the parallel. But it's still, you're trying to make it fit into the box right now, right?
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, should we turn it over to Matt?
Well, just real quick, Chuck, so do we go in front of the mark? I couldn't really tell. It looks like it stopped before that. It stopped short on 100.
Yeah, we only went to, is this 100 right here? This on 100 North, you mean?
Yes,
Karen?
yes.
Let me look. Here's 100 North, 100 West. Yeah, we just went up to the crosswalk that's there at this street. And the mark is on the east of there.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. So we made an assumption that we basically went one block either side of Main Street. But that's not to say that you couldn't extend it further up to pick up more spaces.
Gotcha. I mean, yeah, there just seems like a high usage for, residents. I mean, the mark gets used quite a bit, and there's, need for parking. So bringing that up would be advantageous. And then on that 100 North, when we did our walk around on that first block on the south side of 100, we had like all those, from the post office to the US Forest Service.
Right.
Bringing, like, utilizing some of those trees to offer shaded parking without having to get rid of those. I mean, are we going to look at potentially going in, like the same as with Center, when we did the walk around again, like you mentioned, it looked like there was options to make that a little deeper. if we're so inclined.
Yeah, this is still the work in progress. We haven't gotten to what I would call the 100% set of,
Gotcha.
this is, maybe a 70% or 60%. We've looked at a lot of the constraints now, and yes, we would, to answer your question directly. Yeah, we
Okay.
talked about that, and we'd be looking at that.
Nora?
So, one of the things that I'm working on, and people probably know this, but is we are doing an emergency order to allow the extension of outdoor dining, the possibility of outdoor dining in the road right of way as a temporary thing until November 30th. And eventually it's a concept that we might want to consider changing our land use code to allow on a permanent basis seasonally. And this parking scheme works great because it's got the parallel parking right up along the curb. So if people want to lose a couple spaces in front of them and do some additional seating, for example, that this would accommodate that really quite easily. If there were angled parking on the right along the curb, they could still do it in some of the parking spaces, but this center lane seems to make a lot of sense based on the fact that we may be looking at that as a change to our code. That's all.
Thanks, you guys.
Okay, any other questions for Chuck before we move on to Matt? Seeing none. Thank you again, Chuck. Progress looks great. I definitely think the concept so far is in direct alignment with what the group had envisioned and a lot of the feedback we've gotten from the community. So appreciate the good work on that. With that, Matt, I will turn it over to you. You're on mute, Matt.
No, still muted. Nope.
Hey, Matt, we're still not hearing you. Even when you're off mute, we're not hearing you. Maybe leave the meeting and come back in. I've had issues with that where that addresses it. Okay, Matt is left. Watching for Matt. Matt is back.
No.
Not sure what's going on, Matt. We're not getting you. It's showing that you're off mute, but
Any
Is there a
chance?
way you can adjust your microphone volume level?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. On your computer or whatever you're using.
I mean, if Nora can patch in from the Caribbean and Chuck can patch in from Crater Lake. You ought to be able to do something from your backyard there, Matt.
Matt, maybe you could call in on the other number. It's on the invite.
Yeah, and one of us can share the info. That would be a good task for Carly. Screen share while Matt talks to us. That's over my pay grade.
I think he'll still be able to screen share. He'll just talk on the phone at the same time.
Oh, okay. Great.
Although I am available to screen share if needed.
Okay. Yes. Matt? Carly, what's the number to call in? Hold on one second.
It will be on his invite. Let's see. I hesitate to do it just so not just anyone can call in.
Okay, yeah, hold on a second. Man, I'm gonna. So I shared the one of 4 numbers that's on the invite.
Yeah, a couple of them should work. Any luck, Summer?
I don't see him yet in the waiting room. The joys of technology.
I know. I know.
Got him.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Modern technology, I apologize for that. All right, so now I'll see if I can, I'll share my screen.
So you may need to turn your computer audio or your.
There you are, I've just turned the volume off.
We're getting feedback.
You're getting feedback? I've just turned the volume off.
There we go. Perfect.
Better? Okay, great. I've turned the volume off. All right, let's see if this works. Okay, straight to the tabulation. We applied basically, like Chuck, a number of different templates to side streets and came up with about 150 additional car spots. Of course, it depends on, you know, the different priorities you apply to these streets, whether you want turn lanes, whether you don't want turn lanes, as Chuck has articulated. The streets we looked at were East Centre, going all the way up to the council chambers, so the first 2 blocks of East Centre, West 100 North, East 100 North, the first block, West Centre Street, both the south and the north side, and the East 100 South. And so, like I said, the number about additional 150 car spots, give or take. I just wanted to touch quickly on perpendicular parking. It's been a while since we last met and I last spoke. It's widely applied in other countries where I'm very familiar with it, and also in the United States. Has certain advantages. Perpendicular parking, you can access it from both directions. Currently, the angled parking on West Centre Street can only be accessed in the direction of travel, which is coming from the west to the east, not from Main Street. Perpendicular parking would help remedy that. The other advantage of perpendicular parking is it uses a lot less street length. It's very efficient. And it's quite well suited to this location, I believe, given that it's a low volume street, it's a low traffic street, and it's naturally kind of bordered by these two necks, this neck here and the mid-block neck there. As Chuck has mentioned, though, we do have this issue with this parkway, this green parkway to the north, and whether to recess the curb or not. If we did recess the curb or not, we'd increase the amount of additional parking quite substantially. So I sent through, as part of the submission, the PDF files. They're a bit awkward to work through. I'm not sure if you'd prefer me to go to the SketchUp files. It's a little easier to navigate, but it might just be best to stay off the PDF file. Can you all see that? I can't. Yes, you're going to have to give thumbs up because great. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so this is looking on the west side. We've got perpendicular parking, just like Chuck mentioned, on the southern side, and then we've put the perpendicular parking on the northern side, and this is all the western section. And on the eastern, don't do this to me, it's all quite well spaced. Chuck has looked at a number of vehicles. We imported a number of different vehicles into our model. This is a Ford F-150. We looked at Ford Explorers, and we did this for all of our streets just to get a good look at turning geometry and spacing. And I'll move through this quickly. In fact, I'm going to change and go to the model, much easier. And so what we'd be looking at in terms of perpendicular parking, we were able to fit in a number of additional parks on the southern side using generous spacing of 9 feet 6 width, length of 18 feet 6, which is larger than the city code, a distance between those perpendicular parks rather of 27 feet. And based on roughly these dimensions, we would have to recess the curb on the northern side by about 9 feet, which would all add up to an additional 21 additional car spaces. If we were to tighten these dimensions up, they're 9 feet 8 on the northern side, like I said, 9 feet 6 on the southern side. If we were to reduce those down to the minimum code of about 9 feet 1 and 9 feet, we get an additional 2 spots for about 23 spots for West Centre. It would require recessing the northern curb by about 9 feet, anywhere to 6 to 9 feet. Chuck has mentioned this northern parkway that sits here is very uneven. It's quite elevated. I went off and inspected it. It's about 2 feet high, and those trees would be impacted by any recess of this curb. That's problematic. I value trees. I think we all value trees. I'd like to see if we can't preserve the trees, but I'd also like to see if we couldn't explore moving those trees. I did a little bit of work, and apparently moving trees, transplanting them isn't too big a problem in some instances. I'd love to see if we could do it here because the benefits would be substantial. So that's West Centre Street. It's a bit hard to talk because I can't get feedback. Should I unmute and get comments, and I'll stop speaking? Keep going? Keep going. All right, okay. So that's West Centre. West Centre Street. I'll now move on to East Centre Street. So actually, before I do that, I will, and I sympathise with Chuck, when you've got a lot of windows and you're trying to navigate your way through this, it is not easy. And then we looked at various models for median parking. from around the world, Bundaberg, which you've got this end-to-end median parking. And we see it here in the United States, in cities like Bellingham, which I have here. And of course, the big one we looked at was Lancaster. And we were led to Lancaster by roughly these documents here, of which I became a huge supporter of this document put out by the Federal Highway Administration called Achieving Multimodal Networks. It wades your way through all of the various codes. It's a really easy document. If you have the time and the inclination and you're interested, I would strongly recommend perusing this. It's an easily digested document, has 2 pages of summary and code on just about everything you can think of. Great document. It all basically led towards Lancaster as a textbook example of changing streets that look roughly like this, which isn't unfamiliar, to something like this. And the great thing about the Lancaster design, which I've mentioned previously, a few things, is the cross-sectional width. The Lancaster design has a full cross-sectional width of 70 feet. Now that's narrower than most of our streets, or many of our streets, I should say. It has parallel parking, a travel way, then end-to-end median parking, travel way, and then parallel parking on the other side for most of the street. And it's all at grade. And by that, I mean it's all level. As Chuck was mentioning, there's no elevated median here. There's no elevated curve in the middle of the street. There's no elevated bulb outs. It's all at grade, and then clever use of landscaping and fixed furniture features, and even temporary furniture features like these pot plants have provided geometry and outlined the street. There's so much going for this design. It's also, really well spaced. It has flexibility in terms of sizing. So we went ahead and applied the Lancaster model to see how it would apply, or if it could work on our various side streets. I'll now flick back to SketchUp. And for those who weren't in the subcommittee meeting, SketchUp is a drawing design software that is used by architects principally. And it's really easy because you create 3D models, and from there you can just drag things around, and it's great. It's really easy to draw things with this. So just to give you the layout, anything that is a yellow box is a parking space. Anything that is green is a void, a landscaping or pedestrian void, not dissimilar to Lancaster. And we have curb, and then we have the double end-to-end angled parking in the middle of the street. We have these voids for, if you were, for example, interested in doing landscaping. My computer will think for a bit. These files are large. You can landscape. It's got a mid-block curb while it's thinking, and it's got parallel parking to the north. This is all very similar to what Chuck's done. I apologise for the other wait. Now, Chuck has mentioned problems with landscaping, and I acknowledge those, that, you've got amenities that run under the street. You do have to make sure that anything you put in the street is going to not create ongoing problems with the street itself. And of course, these are just my renderings of taking some really big trees out of a model and plonking them all in. This isn't to say what it would look like, but it is to give a sense of space and a general understanding of how things would look. In terms of vehicular spacing, it's really generous. Here I've put 2 full cab F-150s end to end. They're accommodated no problem. And here you have SUVs. You can see the amount of space that exists between these. As I said, it looks a bit congested when you see it all together, but it's very generously spaced. And in terms of dimensions to the east and the west, and this is getting more technical and probably more for UDOT. We've got parallel parks in this example with the mid-block crosswalk between 20 and 22 feet. The depths of these all comply with the city code. These passenger voids, it's my whole career. These pedestrian voids are about 8.5 feet wide. And then, of course, there's capacity there for ADA vehicles. And as Nora was saying, we've got the parallel parks, which is great for parklets and changing the city code. So I'm not sure there's too much more to add to that. There's a whole stack of notes. One thing we did explore, and we were concerned about these medians and these travel lanes of 13 feet, 12 feet wide, is we looked at the ability of larger vehicles to turn onto these streets from Main Street and onto Main Street. We looked at buses, we looked at shorter semi-trailers, what they call a WB40, which roughly has a bed, a trailer that's about 40 feet long. To give you an idea, that's roughly a Nichols food truck, and then a WB50, which is roughly a Cisco and a US Foods food truck. And we really saw no issue with them being able to turn these tighter turns. Again, one of the great advantages of having the median all at grade, all level with nothing raised, is that these larger vehicles, through careful placement of street furniture features, can clear these turns while you're not designing it for those vehicles in general. The problem of designing turns for larger vehicles in general is that you end up with more generous spacing, and that enables smaller vehicles to take turns at speed. And that booklet that I have referred to heavily, Achieving Multimodality, for want of a better word, speaks at length about the importance of keeping sizes not tight but not generous. And they make a point that in urban settings, these radii should be no more than 15 feet in width. And they also make a point of saying that travel lanes shouldn't be too wide either. So that doesn't seem to be a problem. How do we go? Do I stop when there's comments, or do I keep going? It's a bit hard with feedback. Okay. Yep.
Looks like we have some comments and questions, Matt.
Matt, I'm just curious. So the green stripes in these diagrams that you've shown, is that for green infrastructure? Is that are those numbers, are those stripes used in your count for potential parking? What's the significance of those? Uh-oh.
We may have lost phone connection.
Aaron, I can answer that for you.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
Am I back?
There you go. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Chuck. Yes, Karen, if I just refer to, and this is Google Earth, so we'll just take a quick walk down Lancaster. So this is a narrower profile section of Lancaster.
Okay.
So if you see Lancaster has basically parking here, and then it has this void, this space, and I'm calling it a pedestrian void for want of a better word. But in that void, in that spacing, they've put a light, they've put a tree, and it would be up to any final design as to what goes in here. But it does enable this whole setup to kind of breathe and have a bit more of a mall feel. So rather than having parking spot, parking spot, parking spot, parking spot, this one of the things I do love about their design here, and it might not be applicable to Moab, it might not be well suited. No doubt design experts would have a good opinion on that, as would the community and council and the county, but it enables you to kind of do something else. The other thing it does is it provides flexibility in geometry for larger vehicles. So in the mock-ups I showed, the width was 9 feet, but if you do have a larger vehicle, or indeed a longer vehicle, it can encroach somewhat in a way that you can't with set geometry. So just one of the clever features of of this setup. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And but so in your count, those green strips were not counted as permanent?
No.
Okay.
No, they're not. They're not. They're
Okay.
not counted at all.
That's great.
So there's that additional space there if you wanted to convert it to parking. And again, this all comes down to priorities of I'd imagine obviously the community would have input. And as I mentioned, design experts, county council as to what is prioritized. I should probably mention that further while I'm here. As in Chuck's design, he put that turning bay there. And indeed, in the initial mock-ups I was doing, I had exactly the same thing. That multimodal network book kind of gave me the courage to start prioritizing pedestrians and the kind of more of an understanding that, the lanes could be narrower, the parking bays could be narrower. And that booklet speaks at length about that. Like I mentioned before, the more generous geometry you put in for cars, the less it tends to support other road users. And so that kind of influenced my thinking quite a bit. So for example, these parallel parking bays are 8 feet wide rather than 9 feet wide. And that comes in large part from that book, plus another code, the MUTCD code. And so I decided to kind of keep it more like Lancaster in the end. And if someone wanted to do a U-turn, to see if we couldn't accommodate it up the end. But that's a design decision. As you can see here, if you didn't want to put a mid-block crosswalk, there's plenty of scope here to sacrifice a few spaces and maybe convert these just like Chuck has done and put in a turning bay. That's all detail. I think, the important point is that the concepts work, and I think they work well in dramatically increasing the amount of parking on our side streets and also meeting other needs within the city that would support economic development, for example.
And I really, sorry for interrupting, but I really like the green spaces, because even if you put pots with some, a tree in it, so that, I don't know if the roots would cause a problem in the long term, but just having that vegetation and potential shade in the long run, I think will go a long way to make this really, really a pleasant experience, especially in our climate. And I know that that's an ongoing maintenance cost. But I personally think it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah, Nora, and just kind of probably speaking more as a citizen as rather someone who's gone up and drawn. One of the things I think these trees is they look great, and as you said, I value trees highly. This is fairly straightforward. It's just a tree with some nice grass, and the other thing I like is that they've just done fairly. These are pot plants. I mean, these are just pots, and these aren't set. These are just pots with flowers, so they're easily movable. If you decide you want to change their location, or trucks are taking this turn a bit too tight, you can move them again. And I think it's really clever. I think the designers on this one have done an amazing job. Now, I'll also just point out, because we'll probably go now to East 100 North. Lancaster has two profiles. I'll go back to where I was. They have a cross-sectional width of 70 feet, which is parallel travelway, median travelway parallel. And that's for most of their street, which runs for 9 blocks. And then they have a couple of blocks, which is just a travelway, the median parking, and a travelway. And they've done that to prioritize a wider sidewalk. And so this cross-sectional width is 70 less 16, so it's not wide at all, and that's important for when we look at East 100 North, which probably we're going to have a look at now. Any more questions or comments? It's best if I stay on the phone. No? Proceed. Proceed. So this is East 100 North. and it's a narrower street as.
Matt, sorry, we're seeing your email box. There you go.
Is it gone?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, sorry, you don't want to see my email box. I'll close it. Oh no, hang on, it's on that. There we go. All right. So there's East 100 North, just for orientation. This is Main Street down this end. Here's Moonflower up here. Same concept. I won't call it a problem. The issue with East 100 North is it's a narrower street. It's 62 feet wide. But as we just saw with Lancaster, they've managed to accommodate a narrower street, less than 62 feet wide. I've included a mid-block crosswalk, again, trying to facilitate, as much pedestrian movement as possible. The other thing I like about taking the median all the way down to the street is trying to connect Main Street more with the rest of the street, because this seems to be a bit of a dead zone, unfortunately, because it's got so much potential. And Moonflower's this isolated corner of great, and I like the idea of connecting this. One of the issues that Chuck raised in a meeting, and it's a really valid point, is about these parking spaces and how they might impinge on turn lanes. This is the same as what we just saw with East Centre Street. Rather than having 3 turn lanes, this only has 2 turn lanes. In keeping with Lancaster, we also see that in Salt Lake City. We also see only 2 turn lanes on West Centre Street in our own city, and we also see parking immediately adjacent to those turn lanes. So I would hope that that could be explored, and if it's acceptable, that could be applied. The other advantage I see with kind of having that would be that it might facilitate ADA parking, of which we don't have much downtown. If we could make some of these ADA and then have immediate access to this pedestrian crossing, I think that'd be great. We end up with this setup with an additional 30 car spots. That includes, though, recessing this curb up here for 8 parallel parking spots. One of the issues with recessing would be drainage, but these spots could potentially be graded so that the original drainage channel continues along in its current location. One of the issues would be trees, and this tree might either be lost, or it might be moved, or it might be prioritised that the trees remain and we do with fewer parking spaces. And again, they're all final design considerations based on feedback. The major issue with this, though, is turning. And I'll just give you a perspective of spacing. And it all looks fairly tight, but the spacing is very generous. I'm sorry these files are so large. I know everyone's busy. So that's the type of spacing you're talking about with, so they're people to give you an idea. So it's fairly, it's generous, it's not tight. If you wanted to change all that to parking, you could. But the bigger issue with this setup on East 100 North is the turns. Because this is narrower, because this turn bay, you've got the curve here, and you've got these this travel lane of only 12 feet wide as per Lancaster, it's going to be tight. In fact, it wouldn't be achievable for these oversized vehicles to turn right here without recessing this curb here at the Main Street intersection. So that would be a problem. Not to say there's not a solution, but that is the biggest issue I can see with this setup. And as Chuck went to just single parking rather than this double parking in the median, so a narrower median, and that of course would work as well. The cost of that, the advantage is you're not moving curbs. The advantage is you don't have to worry about these turns of larger vehicles. The downside is that you'd lose parking spots, but again, this is all prioritization. So there's that. Any questions with regards to that one? I should also mention that with just loading zones, Again, my thinking was influenced by other cities about making potentially timed parking zones, if that would be acceptable to businesses and the delivery companies. And rather than kind of sacrificing all this space, but potentially, like we do in other cities, it's a loading zone between 6 and 10, that type of thing. And then it just becomes a compliance issue. So there's that. And then I guess the other big one to which it's probably worth talking is West 100 North. And as Chuck and I have spoken of easier, this is the easiest to design because there's so little to worry about. But I've included a mid-block crosswalk again. I have designs in the pack, as you've seen, without mid-block crosswalks. I kind of like the idea of a mid-block crosswalk, but you can see there's issues around spacing, etc. But again, it's exactly the same concept. It's turning here, the parking's recessed from the intersection. You've got this parkway just like Lancaster fronting Main Street. You've got the 2 turn lanes. It's all very similar spacing. In fact, I think these pedestrian voids are even wider. So there's really not any issues there. We have raised the comment before about in discussions in the subcommittee about access for these people on some of these lanes, not only on this street, obviously, but on other streets. But when you analyse them more in detail, this is River Canyon Lodge, I should say. This is their entry point. River Canyon Lodge actually has 2 other access points, one on 200 North and one on 100 West. This is the food truck park. It has its main access point on 100 West, but it does have this access point here. This is the laneway behind the Main Street, and I was wondering if, just not having dual access was a problem. They do abut the parking garage, not the parking garage, the parking lot, if they could be provided with one-way access, if that becomes problematic. And this residence here, they have access to the rear lane behind the Love Muffin there that accesses onto Main Street and 200 North. So that may somewhat, alleviate some concerns about access. And we see that on many of our other side streets, that many places have multiple access points onto other blocks. Questions? No questions? Again, I mean, this parking is fairly generous, 23 feet, 22 and a half feet, 70 feet. These are 2 turn lanes. This distance here would only be 20 feet, but again, Multimodal Networks talks about lane widths, and in that it says, there's one quote that says lane widths of 10 feet are appropriate in urban areas and have a positive impact on street safety without impacting traffic operations. So that again gave me the kind of the courage, if you like, to say, all right, 10 foot wide travel lane isn't necessarily a problem, as we've seen in Lancaster and as Multimodal Networks would suggest. Any comments on that? So I think the bottom line is that obviously Chuck and us have been working, and I think we all kind of are on the same page that there is a fair bit of scope for providing additional parking on our side streets. That also prioritises other road users, and I think it's all very encouraging. And I hope it would receive a high level of support from both the business community and the broader community at large.
So where do we go from here? I'm asking that to the group.
So to the group, Nora, or to me?
To the group. I mean, now that,
Yeah.
you know, we've seen these, I think we are headed in a good direction. What do we do now?
Oh, I guess I'm not going to answer that, but the question that I would ask is, we need to deliver a concept design and budget. How do we get from what we've seen today to a final design and budget? And what decisions need to be made?
Curtis, I'll take a stab at that if I can,
Yeah.
unless you want to talk about it.
Go ahead, Chuck.
So you've seen a lot of, I agree with Matt, there's a lot of similarities in what the two of us have done. And we've communicated some, obviously. But the one thing that hasn't been done yet, when I said this is not the 100% concept design from my perspective, is I don't think we've identified enough, I haven't identified enough yet, the constraints. And by that, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't look at utilities. Because we have, those streets, you know, right now hold sanitary sewer, culinary water, storm drains, other utilities that cross through there. And I need to, I believe, look at those. I think we also have to, one of the, I don't know, Matt, if I'd say it's significant, but one of the things that's different between your design and mine is you get closer to the side streets than I do, because I tend to like to preserve the turn lanes. And I think that we can address that with some more analysis on whether or not the turn lanes need to be there. And so I guess what I'm really saying is, I think we need to identify some more constraints, fine-tune the design more adequately. I mean, really, even drainage should be considered at some level, not 100% design level, obviously. And then we'd have a better idea of, you know, how we'd tweak these designs, for lack of a better word, and then be able to put cost to it. That's my way I would approach it. I don't know what anyone else would suggest.
Hey, Chuck, how much time should I account for between now and when we can all follow up as a group and kind of review the results of that analysis and assessment? What's a good window to work with there? 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What do you think?
I really think it's 4 weeks. I mean, it's still just me and Mark right now, and there's a lot going on, believe it or not, in this little sleepy town of Moab. But I think, Carly, that's what I committed to before, wasn't it? About?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I'd like to have a month. I'd like to do some iterations back and forth with Matt, maybe, now that I've got your PDFs of your drawings, Matt, are available. I can download it. Yeah. So that's my belief, Curtis. That's about the best I could do. I don't know about Matt. What are you thinking?
Oh, I'm thinking exactly the same thing. I'm thinking, you know, there's issues around, and, you know, my goal here hasn't been final design, but a demonstration of concept, but there's other considerations. You know, as Chuck has mentioned, there's street poles. You know, if you've got a vehicle here, how's it going? You've got other trees, you've got other considerations, and I think there's solutions to all of those, but I think it would be remiss not to have at least acknowledged those issues and look at the degree to which they would have an impact. And as Chuck said, you know, we've got utilities under much of this. It's part of the reason why I like the at-grade design, because I know the sewer here runs around this location here. It runs about there, which is great, but that's just sewer, and then you've got the connector lines. But, you know, there's all of those issues to consider. And then in terms of costing, I guess it's a question of priorities and what the ultimate design would look like. And I think that, you know, in order for this to really be effective, it has to have a certain design threshold. But again, that's not my place to comment on really. But I agree with Chuck. Any design that would go forward as an initial concept, I think needs to identify just that extra level down of, okay, if this goes here, then what does it do to this power pole that's right here? That sort of thing.
So we'll tentatively plan for our next regular meeting on the 26th of August, and which is 4 weeks from today. And probably in the meantime, now that we've got 2 extra months to work with, I'll work with Carly to update our framework so we can kind of get an idea of when we feel like we'll be wrapped up on this. And then the committee will need to shift back to what other projects are remaining that we want to include, you know, in our proposal. And it'd be great if we could spend, you know, at least a month on those, if that's what the committee decides to do. So do you think we would be on track to have a concept design and budget on this project finished by September 1st?
Are you, who are you asking, Curtis?
You and probably you.
If we're talking about the parking scenario that we've just been discussing, yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great. You know, and that would give us, you know, whatever's left in September and October to kind of, you know, polish off any other project proposals to be included in the package. And it, you know, if we could have it to them by October 1st, you know, that would be fantastic. Also, we don't need to milk out, you know, time that we don't need. But I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Chuck, and Matt, your contributions and the level of detail. And I think it's great to see this come together. I'm looking forward to huddling back in 4 weeks and understanding the constraints and kind of how that's going to dictate the design. So,
hey,
Karen?
Curtis, this is Monty. If I may, I would like to interject a little bit here, and I'm going to sound a little bit redundant because Curtis, Chuck, and Matt did a good job of kind of summarizing what they thought they needed going forward. And I just want to just kind of reiterate some of those items and talk about a couple more. Absolutely, I think it's wise to look at the constraints, utilities, drainage. You know, when I look at these, I find myself thinking about bicycles and to make sure that our designs are compatible with the bicycle friendly nature that Moab has. The assumptions, and along with those assumptions, it's really important to understand those. So as you engage in your public outreach or whatever engagement you're going to have with the public, because that's going to be important that we have a high level of confidence that the public and the community is behind whatever project we do carry forward to propose to the commission. And then environmental challenges. Are there any historic buildings? Are there anything from an environmental perspective that you may not be thinking of that could present some challenges to us? We don't need to address those. Obviously, we need to do the environmental document as we prepare a concept, but it is very, very helpful to understand, are there environmental challenges that will be before us as we move forward? And then the other one, it's kind of related to those environmental challenges, and the other is just risks. Are there risks? It's not a bad idea to spend some time, thinking through risks and just brainstorming through what are the risks to this approach? What haven't we thought about? Because I think that would be very helpful as we move forward to understand those. And then finally is the concept estimate. Obviously, a concept estimate, like they mentioned, you're not going to understand exactly where each given light pole or each tree will be planted. That's not the expectation. And so you need to, and and Chuck, I'm sure, is well versed in this. You know, have your concept with an appropriate level of contingency built in. So that's just, I just wanted to chime in and just, you know, clarify, you know, kind of where I'm coming from and the expectations we'd like to see, so that there's no misunderstanding or miscommunication. That's all I've got to say for now.
This is early. Do you mind if I just ask or it sounds like this concept, this we'll call the Lancaster concept, is the one the committee is interested in investing the time in. So I would suggest that we start some sort of engagement, public engagement and outreach, nice and early. And that can look like a bunch of different things. I know Lisa is watching this meeting, so she's been generating some ideas while watching. And I just want to confirm that this committee is ready to go public with this concept to get some feedback and input. Or do you want us to hold off until September?
My initial thoughts is to, I mean, I'd like to get one more rung up the ladder, but I also don't want to, you know, minimize the ability to hear from the public. You know, I mean, I would love to get that extra rung up the ladder and kind of have a more well-attended committee meeting to review, you know, the work at our next juncture before we kind of start to really broadcast this. But those are just my thoughts.
So, Chair, I just would like to say, Monty, thank you so much for bringing up the engagement from the public, because we know where this last round got us. And my concern is, like, the question I want to ask to this group is, okay, is this what we're going forward with? Because it feels, as it is right now, that this is a very strong concept, and it feels good, feels right. And you know, so if we're saying yes, then I personally would like to get in front of it with the community as soon as possible and not wait, because Curtis, we have been bit in the rear so many times. And if we just show some examples of what we're looking at, and just get ahead of it, I'm all for that. So that's just 2 cents.
I agree completely. One of the complaints that we have been hearing about various projects is we already have the whole thing designed. So, you know, you aren't really going to listen to us anyway, because it's all designed. I mean, people don't like to see that we've gone to such a level of detail and they haven't had an opportunity to give input. So, you know, we can work on something that's pretty general, you know, with some pictures of Lancaster and a little sort of presentation that people can go to online and then maybe comment on. But I agree, we should get it out there sooner or later. And then we'll probably need to do more, of course. But at least that's sort of an initial meeting and so forth.
It's fine with me. I mean, if we feel that strongly, I mean, I certainly don't see a downside to it. My concern was just we're still kind of working through it, and wanted to maintain a level of focus and clarity, you know, so that we can really, you know, get to a firm place that we all feel good about. But if we feel like we're at a point where generally we know where we're headed and it's sufficient enough to put that out there, I mean, I know the public engagement is a big part of this. So, yeah, I mean, that's fine. Fine by me.
I'd like to do public engagement sooner than later. And I'm thinking that an important aspect of it will be identifying what questions we want the public to answer, as opposed to just saying, here's some drawings of what we are, give us your feedback. Like maybe if Lisa or others of us, staff, can identify like the specific aspects that we're looking, what questions to ask to actually give us useful feedback, as opposed to people just making general comments on some plans. Because my initial response was, oh, it's too early because I still see significant difference between these plans. But if we can figure out what input we want, then that can maybe make the process more functional.
Yeah, that would be helpful to understand. I mean, we can measure just general popularity of a concept. That's relatively straightforward. But if you are looking for to understand stuff like community values or potential constraints or conflicts, that's where this process can be really valuable. And if you maybe over the next couple of days as a committee can think those unknowns you still have that you'd like to get input on, and just send it to me and to Lisa, or just to me, I can get it to Lisa, that would be enormously helpful.
So Carly, are we looking at like, you know, the importance of greenery to folks, like mid-block walkways, multiple modalities, I'm like options for, you know, bikes and pedestrians? I mean, what kind of, is that the kind of feedback you're?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of feedback. It can be of that scale. It could be a higher scale, a little lower scale. And what we'll do is we'll try to incorporate as many of them as we can, or maybe some of them will be able to be combined into bigger questions or those kinds of things. But it helps us understand just sort of what you still need to make a decision on, what you're feeling like is under you. And yeah, that would be really helpful.
I'd like to point out something, Curtis, if I may. The one thing I think we have to be careful of that hasn't been resolved yet is if we just show them pictures of Lancaster and the public gets this perception that we're going to plant all of those trees. I like trees too, Matt, but I think we really do have to resolve the issue of trees in the middle of the road, because Lancaster is a desert community, I believe. And while we're desert most of the time, we still push snow. And we have to think about that. I think we'd be remiss in our fiduciary responsibility to figure out how many, maybe there's a different type of trees we show, or maybe it's slower growth. I'm not sure what it is. Greenery is all good, but I think we really just don't want to give the perception that, hey, you showed me a picture that there's a tree every 40 feet or 80 feet. I don't know what they were on there. I just think that's one thing we'd have to be careful about, so we don't give the perception that everything will be like this glade, because I don't think we can do that with the constraints that we're going to have. I think we can put some vegetation out there, and I think shading is great. I've been concerned about that all along, too much of that.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
think what should happen is that maybe Lisa and I have a talk with you, Chuck and Matt, and we talk about what the materials are that need to be, that are appropriate to release at this time. Because it won't be, you know, all of these presentations totally that we're getting input on. I think it'll be really a few select concepts that are at this stage. And we should be watching for things like trees and how the concepts can produce either expectations or create something that someone, you know, unrealistically or too prematurely set some sort of standard that looks ugly, or those kinds of things. Like we would have to make it clear that they're concept only. So I'd be looking for an invite from me, because I think we would have a talk about what materials go out.
Carly, would it be wise to get in touch and maybe potentially invite Cara?
When it comes to, it might be even too premature to know about like vegetation at this point. I don't know.
I mean, but just showing examples of realities compared to, you know, a dream tree that we are not going to have palms, you know. So
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see what
we might just really stylize it, that we don't even.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? Like
Yep.
it's not a promise of the kind of trees, and maybe we just do these kind of a more state kind of drawing that's just a little more bare bones, and then slowly sort of start to build it up.
Sure.
But we'll talk about CAR is a great resource, and maybe if we want to demonstrate that at some point, we would, get her advice on what would be realistic.
So I think it will be really important, once we put this out there, is to write preliminary concept only all over it in big letters.
Yeah, I think words like preliminary, conceptual are important in the messaging of this. And it reinforces exactly what we're trying to convey to the public, which is this isn't fully cooked. We are coming to you early, wanting your input and your engagement to help us design this. So I completely agree.
So Chair Wells, may I say something?
Please.
I am all for early public engagement. I think that's a good idea, good planning, best practice. But when we started this process, I was under the impression that we were going to present a package of projects to UDOT. And I would just as soon see the package go out all at one time rather than just one project. Am I way off base there?
No, I mean, I think we definitely are committed to a kind of the meat and the potatoes of our package, is our parking project. But we have discussed, the northern portion of the multi-use pathway as being a component. I mean, that's something that by all means should have its time and place in the public engagement piece. That's a pretty significant project. And we still have a lot of discussion there. There were issues about easements and segments that were of concern. We haven't really zoomed in on what the northern portion of the pathway, what constraints, are there. So there's quite a bit of work there. The Main Street improvements is something that's still kind of floating out there. We wanted to get a concept of the off Main Street parking and then see what Main Street improvements could occur in conjunction with that. That is something that if we decide to include some improvements to Main Street, that should be included in public engagement. And so what do you think about that as far as a timeline and a framework to work public engagement on these other potential pieces to the package?
So here's what I envision. There's a slight logistical issue because it's my understanding UDOT was waiting for us to finish this off Main Street parking concept so they could do their Main Street improvement model. So they need us to finish this before they can move forward and fully develop that concept. And if we want to get public engagement on this early, we need to do it now. Now, what we can do, paths that I see, we fully cook this, get it to the place, like the off Main Street parking, get it to a place where all the other projects are, because they've all existed before this before this committee convened, right? So the shared use path has been floating out there for a while. The Main Street improvements have been, the South recreational vehicle parking has been a concept. This is a brand new one that we're developing. So we can hold off public engagement and let them all sort of, I would say, get evaluated at the same time, but you'll miss out on having public engagement early on for the off Main Street parking concept. Another option is we get public engagement early, cook this concept as best we can, and then trot like all 4 or whatever the number of projects is out for engagement. And either to just determine overall favorability for each of them, which ones are most important to the community, or to get some meaningful feedback on specific components of those projects. But it feels like those ones are so much more further down the road than this off Main Street parking. So that's why I had in mind sort of a sequential public engagement, an evolving public engagement strategy.
Thoughts on that from the committee?
Yeah, what do you think?
I personally love that because I'm just, the sooner the better. And so if we get something out there, because people are really wondering, you know, I mean, we've started this in April, so like what we're really working on, and this will be a great introduction for me. That's
I'm in favor of getting it out there, and but I don't want to lose sight of the other projects either, because that's something that I'm aware of. We're putting a lot of time into this, but I'm hopeful that there's significant money for the Spanish Valley path as well at the end of the day.
and then Monty, can I ask, so Curtis expressed that, and it was before you were able to join in on the meeting the last time, that there was a potential to look at a mini transit system that could potentially receive operations and maintenance match. Is that totally out of the discussion, or was that correct?
We were entertaining the idea of doing a reduced requirement on a transit to see if it could be scaled back from a 10-year operation to a lower value, a lower cost with a lower commitment for operation. Hadn't been engaged in a conversation with that since the time that we visited with Curtis on that. And so if there's still a desire to pursue that, that could be looked at. Have to go back and see, you know, exactly where we are with that. It's not something that I've heard of any conversation subsequent to that inquiry.
Okay, I mean, I'm just, you know, it also seems like it hits the meat of funding again, but I can levitate when talking about public transportation. So you know, I don't know where the rest of the group is, and I didn't know if it was just a shot in the dark, or if that really is an option that we could, you know, talk to the Transportation Commission about. So
I think we would have to have we'd have to put some flesh on the bones of what a proposal would be, and what the community, what the city and the county would be able to afford, and before we could, you know, make a proposal.
okay.
So that's kind of what I was referring to while we'll parallel. What I was thinking is we're parallel tracking the number one, the exercise, the continued analysis of the Lancaster or off Main Street parking project, look at utilities and constraints. Probably in some form, we're going to want to prepare to have a substantive discussion at our next meeting when we review those updates about other projects. Maybe that's a week after the late August meeting, excuse me. And then the public engagement, you know, will be initiated also. So I think, you know, my feeling is there's still potentially quite a bit of work to do on other projects that may or may not include some form of transit, the multi-use pathway, and Main Street improvements. Once UDOT finishes their modeling, you know, we should probably start thinking about a work plan for the multi-use pathway. And, you know, we have a design and a budget for the entire multi-use pathway. We had talked about in the past as a committee of just looking into the northern portion of that for two reasons. Well, two reasons that I'll mention. Number one, previous conversations with UDOT had referenced they felt like the portion of the multi-use pathway that ties into downtown is probably going to be closer to the criteria. hotspot criteria and more that eligibility gets warmer, I guess, as that multi-use pathway gets closer to downtown, and also just because of trying to manage costs. And so the committee's going to have to, dial into that, identify where we're going to tailor that, and what the constraints are there, and make some decisions. And it sounds like we could put a lot of time into transit still. So I don't know. I guess the feedback that I'm looking for from the committee right now is, in addition to reviewing the updates from Chuck and Matt regarding utilities on off Main Street parking, what else do you want to dig into in 4 weeks in that meeting? And does someone want to be working on some things in between now and then that are related to the multi-use pathway or transit to present to the group in 4 weeks?
Is that, I mean, I would love to work on a small approach for transit.
Okay.
I know Mike, I don't know if he's still on. I can't hear him or see him, but if he wants to join me on trying to figure something out together, that would be, that'd be great. Or if anybody else is interested.
Pat, you need to, if you could silence your speaker on your phone, we're getting a bunch of background stuff.
Yeah, Karen, I think that would be great. I mean, you could spend the next 4 weeks kind of presenting to the committee, what you have in mind there. At least something to get us going, or to whatever level you're able to do that. But I think ultimately, I think you and Mike Duncan, have advocated for some form of transit, and we discussed several options, with Monty. But I think if you want to work on something that we can add to the agenda in 4 weeks and kind of review and dig into, I think that would move us ahead, certainly from where we're at now. And the same goes for the multi-use pathway. If some folks want to kind of look at the review the documentation and the material that we have on that to date, and try to enhance the scope there for review either in 4 weeks or 6 weeks. I mean, that would be helpful too, as opposed to just punting those for a month or 2 months down the line and then starting from scratch. We need to kind of grow a pitchfork here.
So Curtis, Evan is on the multi-use pathway committee. I hate to volunteer people for jobs when they aren't here, but I would like to volunteer him, and I will connect with him and offer my help. I think he would be a good one since he's been involved in the development of that plan and on the committee.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know he's advocated for that in the past. I know Kaylin's been an advocate of that project. Particularly Evan has been a really strong advocate for it. So I think that'd be great. I really appreciate you not only volunteering yourself, but especially Evan. That's what happens when you don't show up to meetings. I think that's good. And then our other project that we've considered is the Main Street improvements. And as Carly's mentioned, the ball's in our court still on that, until we get our off Main Street parking, design finished. So I think if we could circle back in 4 weeks and have some substantive discussions on those issues, I think we would be tracking pretty well.
So Karen,
Yes.
we might be able to, I might be able to, Corey might have time to help a little too. And I have applied for grants and developed shuttle programs before in New Jersey. So I'm kind of sort of familiar with some of the things. It's not at the scale that we're talking, I mean, a bigger scale than what we're talking about, but anyway, so we'd be able to a little bit on that.
Oh, that's excellent, Nora. I mean, this is a question again to you, Dot, and I feel, odd saying this, but it's like sort of being asked out to dinner, and I don't know, like, do you order just the appetizer, or are we allowed to get a side dish and a dessert? And so I don't know, like, if this off Main Street parking is gonna, like, are we talking the $10 million budget? Or how do we incorporate these discussions of these other projects and not sound greedy and ungrateful, but also have a really killer meal? So Monty, I don't know if that's.
So with regard to the off Main parking and I'll call it the dispersed parking off Main Street, some of the guidelines that I've spoken about before is I believe it's that we need to make sure that we're staying at the very most cost would be under the cost per stall for the parking structure. We certainly shouldn't be spending more than what that cost is. We also had some limitations on the aesthetics spending that was on the parking structure, and so we can be mindful of those as well, because we gave up a particular project that we were well on the way to being in the design, and to replace it with what we call a better alternative. But that better alternative should not come at a substantially increased cost, or otherwise is it truly a better alternative? So I guess that the concept estimates help drive that question. I would expect that the cost, 150 stalls is the ballpark we're talking about, would not sum up to the total of the original funding available. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, Karen, but it's a cart and a horse. You got to understand the cost of what's being proposed before you know what else you can also propose. And so I guess that's my guidance on that is, if we get those numbers sooner as opposed to later, then there's more opportunity to understand what additional or other funds are available within the programmed amount.
Got it.
If I may, Karen, feel free to communicate with Monty, directly. And the committee, I believe is already established in previous public meetings that we would kind of shift focus towards the northern portion of the multi-use pathway. So, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, I don't see anything wrong with committee members kind of working on that. As long as they're not making any decisions, but just kind of working on that collaboratively prior to now in 4 weeks.
Yeah, don't be a quorum doing it, of course, but if you're just if you're working, you're workshopping, or not workshopping, you're just working to develop something, that should be fine. As long as it's just three of you.
Okay. So,
Council members.
okay, right. So we're getting towards the tail end here. Unless there's any other discussion that requires the attention of the entire committee, I'm leaning towards adjourning us. Are there any other final comments or questions before we adjourn? Okay, thank you all. It's good to see you. Nora, bring us some coconut juice from the islands, and we'll reconvene in 4 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.